The rusted water wheel hadn't turned in 40 years, but the couple who moved into the abandoned mill would soon discover why the town's wealthiest family desperately wanted to buy it for pennies on the dollar. What they found hidden behind century-old stones would change not just their lives, but expose a secret that powerful people had killed to protect. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Harold and Martha Bennett stood before the weathered stone structure, their life savings of $23,000 converted into a cashier's check that felt impossibly light for such a heavy decision. The real estate agent, a nervous young woman named Stephanie, shifted uncomfortably as she handed over the keys. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked for the third time. The Hartley family increased their offer again this morning. $50,000 for a property you're buying for $23,000. That's more than double. Martha's weathered hand found Harold's, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of 52 years of marriage. "We're certain," she said firmly. Stephanie glanced toward the black Mercedes idling at the end of the gravel drive, where Richard Hartley himself sat watching the transaction through tinted windows. I have to warn you that the Hartleys don't take no for an answer easily. They've owned most of this valley for generations." "Then it's time someone else owned a piece of it," Harold replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands that had worsened since his Parkinson's diagnosis. The mill stood 3 stories tall, its limestone walls stained with decades of weather and neglect. The massive water wheel, frozen in place by rust and time, dominated the eastern wall. Broken windows gazed out like empty eyes, and the roof showed gaps where slate tiles had surrendered to gravity. "Our children think we've lost our minds," Martha admitted as they approached the entrance, their footsteps crunching on gravel mixed with broken glass. "Selling a perfectly good condo in Florida to buy this. Let them think what they want," Harold muttered, though the dismissal clearly pained him. Their son, Bradley, a successful investment banker in Manhattan, had been particularly cruel in his assessment. "You're 73 years old, Dad," he'd said during their last phone call. "Mom's 71. This is when people downsize to manage care, not take on a renovation project that would challenge people half your age." Their daughter Patricia had been more subtle but equally dismissive. "I just worry about you being so isolated," she'd said, though she hadn't visited their Florida condo once in the 3 years they'd lived there. "What if something happens? What if Dad's condition worsens?" The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Their children worried about isolation while never calling, fretted about their health while never visiting. The move to Florida had been Patricia's idea originally. "Somewhere safe and predictable for your golden years," she'd said. But safe and predictable had nearly killed them with boredom. The mill's heavy oak door groaned as Harold pushed it open, revealing an interior that matched the exterior's decay. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through holes in the roof. The massive grinding stones sat silent in the center of the main floor, surrounded by the skeletal remains of the grain elevator system. "Look at those beams," Harold breathed, his engineer's eye immediately assessing the structure. "Old growth oak, probably from trees that were centuries old when they were felled. They don't make them like this anymore." Martha was already moving through the space with the purposeful stride of someone envisioning transformation. "The kitchen will go here," she announced, gesturing toward the northern wall. "We'll keep those stones as a centerpiece. Imagine the conversations they'll start." They spent the first hours exploring their new domain. The mill consisted of the main grinding floor, a second level that once housed grain storage, and a third floor that appeared to have been living quarters for the Miller's family. A narrow stone staircase spiraled between levels, worn smooth by countless feet over the decades. "Harold, come look at this," Martha called from the second floor. She stood before a wall of built-in wooden cabinets, their doors hanging askew, but the craftsmanship still evident. Inside, they discovered artifacts of the mill's working days. Leather-bound ledgers recording grain purchases from 1892, glass bottles that once held oils for the machinery, and photographs of the mill in its prime. One photograph in particular caught Harold's attention. It showed a family of 5 standing before the mill, the water wheel turning behind them, their faces solemn in that way Victorian portraits demanded. But what struck him was the inscription on the back. The Hartley Mill, 1894. May its secrets remain buried. The Hartley Mill, Martha read. This belonged to Richard Hartley's family? Seems so. Makes you wonder why they sold it in the first place if they want it back so badly now. As afternoon faded toward evening, they returned to their temporary lodgings at the town's only bed and breakfast. The proprietor, Mrs. Chen, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. "So you're the ones who bought the old mill," she said, setting down cups of tea without being asked. "Brave of you." "Brave?" Martha asked. Mrs. Chen glanced around her empty dining room, then leaned closer. "That mill's been abandoned for 40 years. The Hartleys sold it to the Brennan family in 1983, and they lasted exactly 3 months before abandoning it. Since then, anyone who's tried to renovate it has given up within weeks." "Why?" Harold asked. "Strange things. Accidents. Equipment failures. Workers refusing to come back." She straightened as the bell above the door chimed. "But I'm sure you'll have better luck." Richard Hartley entered the bed and breakfast with the confident stride of a man who owned half the county. At 58, he wore his wealth like armor, perfectly tailored suit, Italian leather shoes that had never seen honest dirt, and a smile that never reached his calculating eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett," he said, approaching their table. "I was hoping we could talk." Harold stood slowly, his tremor more pronounced when stressed. "Mr. Hartley, I believe we said everything necessary through our real estate agents. Perhaps you didn't understand the full generosity of my offer. $50,000 for a property you paid $23,000 for. That's an instant profit of $27,000, enough to find somewhere more suitable for people in your situation." "Our situation?" Martha's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Hartley's smile widened. "Your age, your health concerns. That mill is dangerous, even for young, able-bodied workers. For a couple in their 70s, one with Parkinson's." He shrugged eloquently. "We appreciate your concern," Harold said dryly. "But we're not interested in selling." $75,000. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Chen busied herself unnecessarily with the tea service, clearly eavesdropping. "No," Martha said simply. $100,000. Hartley's smile had vanished entirely. "That's more than 4 times what you paid. Only a fool would refuse." "Then I guess we're fools," Harold replied. "Good evening, Mr. Hartley." Hartley stood slowly, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate precision. "You know, my family built that mill in 1847. 5 generations of Hartleys worked those stones, ground grain for this entire valley. It's our heritage you're squatting in." "Then you should have thought of that before your family sold it," Martha observed. "And before letting it rot for 40 years? Careful, Mrs. Bennett. This is a small town. You'll find it can be very unwelcoming to outsiders who don't know their place." After he left, Mrs. Chen approached with a fresh pot of tea and a conspiratorial expression. "You just made an enemy of the most powerful man in 3 counties, she said, but her tone carried more admiration than warning. "We've dealt with bullies before," Martha replied. That night, they lay in the unfamiliar bed discussing the encounter. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. "He's not going to give up," Harold said. "I know. The question is why he wants it so badly. What's worth $100,000 in a mill that's been rotting for 40 years? Maybe it's really just family pride. Rich people get weird about legacy properties." Martha turned to face him in the darkness. "You don't believe that any more than I do. Did you see his face when we refused? That wasn't wounded pride. That was fear." The next morning brought 2 discoveries. First, their rental car had 4 flat tires, each cut with surgical precision. Second, a work crew they'd hired to begin clearing debris from the mill called to cancel. "I'm real sorry," the foreman said over the phone, "but we've decided to take another job. Nothing personal." "How much did Hartley pay you to back out?" Harold asked bluntly. The silence on the other end was answer enough. By the 3rd day, it became clear that Hartley's influence extended throughout the local contractor community. 3 separate crews had canceled, each with increasingly flimsy excuses. The hardware store suddenly couldn't fill their lumber order. The electrician they'd scheduled developed a mysterious illness. "He thinks he can freeze us out," Harold said, standing in the mill's main room. "Make it impossible for us to renovate." Martha was examining the grinding stones, running her hands over their smooth surface. "Then we'll do it ourselves. We renovated our first house with our own hands. Remember? When we were young and broke and everyone said we were crazy? We were 25 then, and now we have 50 years more experience." She smiled at him, the same determined smile that had convinced him to buy that first fixer-upper. "Besides, what else are we going to do? Go back to Florida and wait to die?" They started small, clearing debris and broken glass. Harold's trimmer made detail work difficult, but he could still swing a sledgehammer when needed. Martha proved surprisingly adept with the reciprocating saw, cutting away rotted wood with focused intensity. On the 5th day, while removing damaged floorboards on the 2nd level, Harold's crowbar struck something that didn't sound like wood. Beneath the boards, they discovered a metal box, its surface green with verdigris, but still solid. "It's locked," Martha observed, hefting the box. "And heavy." Harold retrieved his bolt cutters from the truck. The lock, despite its age, required significant effort to break. When it finally gave way, they opened the box to find a collection of documents wrapped in oilcloth. The first document was a land survey from 1923, showing not just the mill but extensive mining claims throughout the surrounding hills. The second was a geological report indicating significant mineral deposits, specifically silver and lead. The third made Martha gasp. "Harold, look at this. It's a contract between Hartley's grandfather and something called the Eastern Mining Consortium. They were planning to demolish the mill and strip mine the entire valley." "But the mill's still standing," Harold pointed out. "Keep reading. The contract was voided when the surveyor died in an accident, right here in the mill. Then the backup surveyor disappeared entirely." Martha looked up. "This is what Hartley doesn't want found. Evidence that his family's fortune was built on plans to destroy the valley they claimed to protect." A sound from below made them both freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy, echoed through the main floor. Harold grabbed a hammer while Martha reached for her phone. "No signal," she whispered. The footsteps paused, then began ascending the spiral staircase. Harold positioned himself between Martha and the stairs, hammer raised despite the pronounced shaking of his hand. Bradley Bennett appeared at the top of the stairs, expensive suit incongruous in the dusty mill. Their son looked older than his 45 years, stress lines carved deep around his eyes. "Brad?" Martha couldn't hide her shock. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to save you from yourselves," he said, brushing dust from his sleeve with obvious disgust. "Do you have any idea what you've gotten into?" "How did you even know?" Harold began. "Richard Hartley called me. Professional courtesy," he said. "One successful businessman to another. He told me my parents were endangering themselves with some insane renovation project." "And you came running to his defense," Harold said bitterly. "I came running because he offered me a solution, a generous solution." Bradley reached into his jacket and withdrew a check. $250,000. $250,000. All you have to do is sign the mill over to him and walk away. The silence stretched between them, decades of disappointment and misunderstanding, crystallizing in a single moment. "Is that what we're worth to you?" Martha asked quietly. "A finder's fee from Richard Hartley?" "It's what the mill is worth, apparently. More than 10 times what you paid. You could buy a beautiful assisted living apartment, have medical care on site for Dad, live comfortably for the rest of your lives." "In a box," Harold said. "Waiting to die. It's not a box. It's a community. With people your own age, activities, medical supervision." "Brad," Martha interrupted. "When was the last time you visited us? Not a phone call, not a text, an actual visit." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You know how busy things have been? The merger, the kids' schools." 3 years, Harold supplied. 3 years since you've seen us in person. But Hartley calls and you're on the next flight. Because he was right to be concerned. Look at this place. It's a death trap. Dad, your hand shakes so badly you can barely hold a cup of coffee. Mom, you're 71 years old. This is insane. Martha picked up the check, studying it. Did Hartley tell you why he wants the mill so badly? Does it matter? Take the money, please. If not for yourselves, then for Pat and me. We worry about you. You worry about us? Harold repeated flatly. Is that why Patricia sent us a card with the wrong anniversary date last year? Because she was so worried she couldn't remember whether it was 49 or 50 years? 52, Martha added quietly. We've been married 52 years. Bradley's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. I have to take this. Just think about the offer. I'm staying at the bed and breakfast tonight. We can discuss it over dinner. After he left, Harold slumped against the wall. The tremor in his hands had worsened, spreading up his arms. Martha went to him, steadying him with practiced ease. He's our son, Harold said, voice breaking. When did we become nothing more than a problem to be solved? When we stopped being useful, Martha replied. When we became old, they returned to examining the documents, trying to piece together the full story. The papers revealed a pattern of accidents and disappearances dating back to the 1,920 seconds, all connected to attempts to either survey or renovate the mill. The Eastern Mining Consortium had eventually abandoned their plans, but not before 3 men had died under mysterious circumstances. The final document in the box was a handwritten letter dated 1,924. The mill keeps its secrets. We thought the old stories were just superstition, but there's something in the foundations that shouldn't be disturbed. The Hartleys know, but their greed blinds them. I'm leaving this record in case someone needs the truth someday. The surveyor didn't die in an accident. He found the chamber beneath the stones, and what he saw there drove him mad. Hartley's father sealed it and spread the story of structural instability to keep people away. But they'll try again. They always do. The silver is worth too much to ignore forever. A chamber beneath the stones, Martha mused. Harold, those grinding stones? They're massive. What could be underneath them? One way to find out. They descended to the main floor, where the 2 circular grinding stones dominated the space. Each stone measured 8 feet in diameter and nearly 2 feet thick. The kind of stones that could crush grain or hide secrets. Harold retrieved his pry bar and began working at the edges of the upper stone, called the runner stone. Years of disuse had essentially cemented it to the bedstone beneath, but gradually it began to shift. What happens next will expose a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone imagined and reveal why the most powerful family in the valley will do anything to keep it buried. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Working together, they managed to shift the runner stone aside, revealing not the expected bedstone surface, but a carefully constructed opening. Stone steps, worn smooth with age, descended into darkness. We need better lights, Martha said, but Harold was already heading for the truck and their emergency supplies. They descended carefully, Harold leading with a powerful flashlight, while Martha followed with a second light in her phone, still hoping for a signal to document what they found. The stairs spiraled down further than seemed possible, carved directly into bedrock. The chamber at the bottom took their breath away. It wasn't a rough cave or simple cellar, but a carefully constructed room with vaulted ceilings and walls covered in Native American petroglyphs. But what drew their attention was the spring in the center, a natural hot spring that filled the air with mineral-scented steam. This is why the mill was built here, Harold breathed. Not just for water power, they built it over a sacred spring. Martha was examining the walls more closely. These symbols, they're warnings. And look here. She directed her light to a section of newer carving, clearly done with metal tools rather than stone. Names and dates, all the men who supposedly died in accidents. They didn't die in accidents, Harold said grimly. They were killed to keep this secret. A sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, echoed through the mill. Dad? Mom? Bradley's voice called. Where are you? But he wasn't alone. They could hear other voices, including one that made Harold's blood run cold. Richard Hartley. They found it, Hartley was saying. The stones have been moved. Martha grabbed Harold's arm. There, she whispered. pointing to a narrow passage leading away from the main chamber. It has to go somewhere. They squeezed into the passage, their flashlights revealing a tunnel that appeared to follow the underground stream feeding the spring. Behind them, they could hear people descending the stairs. The tunnel emerged after what felt like miles but was probably only a few hundred yards, opening into a small cave hidden behind the mill's water wheel. They pushed through hanging vines to find themselves in the gathering dusk. "We need to get to the truck," Harold said. But even as they circled toward the parking area, they could see Bradley's rental car blocking their vehicle. "The documents," Martha said suddenly. "We left them in the chamber." "No." Harold patted his jacket. "I grabbed them when we heard the voices. But we need somewhere safe to go, and we need help." "Mrs. Chen," Martha said. "She doesn't like Hartley, and her nephew is a state police officer." They made their way through the woods, avoiding the main road. Harold's trimmer made the going difficult, but adrenaline kept him moving. By the time they reached the bed and breakfast, full dark had fallen. Mrs. Chen took one look at their dirt-covered clothes and grim expressions and ushered them inside. "What did you find?" she asked simply. They told her everything, showing her the documents. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she read. "My grandfather told stories," she said slowly, "about the old mill and why the Native Americans considered this valley sacred. He said there were hot springs with healing properties, and that the Hartleys had built the mill to hide them. But I thought they were just stories." "Why would they hide hot springs?" Harold asked. "Control," Mrs. Chen replied. "Think about it. Mineral springs in the 1,920 seconds were incredibly valuable. Health spas, sanitariums, resort towns built around them. But only if you owned all the land around them. The Hartleys only owned the mill property then. If news of the springs got out, land values would skyrocket before they could buy up the valley. So they killed to keep the secret, then spread stories about the mill being dangerous to keep people away," Martha concluded. "And now they own 90% of the valley." "Mrs. Chen added, "all except your mill. They finally have enough control to develop the springs into an exclusive resort, but they need the source." A car door slammed outside. Through the window, they could see Hartley's Mercedes pulling up, followed by Bradley's rental. "Back door," Mrs. Chen said urgently. "My car's in the alley. Keys are in the visor." As they slipped out the back, they could hear Hartley's voice, cold and controlled. "They can't have gone far. The old man can barely walk." Mrs. Chen's car was a modest Honda, invisible in its ordinariness. Harold's hands shook too badly to drive, so Martha took the wheel, pulling away slowly to avoid attention. "Where are we going?" Harold asked. "The only place I can think of where Hartley doesn't have influence. The state police barracks in Millerville." The 40-minute drive felt like hours. Martha constantly checked the mirrors for pursuit, while Harold clutched the documents that proved a century of murder and conspiracy. The state police took them seriously, especially after examining the documents and making several phone calls. Detective Sarah Morgan, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying temples, led the investigation. "We've had suspicions about the Hartleys for years," she admitted. "Too many convenient accidents. Too many business rivals who suddenly decided to leave town, but we've never had proof." "Will this be enough?" Martha asked. "It's a start. Combined with what you've discovered and your testimony about the threats and sabotage, we can at least open an investigation." She paused. "But I need to be honest. The Hartleys have money, lawyers, connections. This won't be easy or quick. They spent the night in a motel near the barracks, taking turns, keeping watch, despite police assurances of protection." Harold's tremor had worsened from the stress, and Martha could see the toll the day had taken on him. "We could still walk away," she said softly. "Take their money and find somewhere else to start over." Harold looked at her, and she saw the same determination that had carried them through 52 years of marriage. "You don't mean that." "No," she admitted. "I don't. But I had to say it. Those men died for what we found. Their families never knew the truth. Someone has to stand up to the Hartleys. Even if it costs us everything, what's everything? We're 73 and 71 years old. Our children see us as problems. Society sees us as useless. But this matters. We matter." The next morning brought unexpected allies. Mrs. Chen had spread the word, and 3 other families came forward with stories of Hartley intimidation and mysterious accidents involving relatives who had opposed the family's expansion. Bradley appeared at the police station while they were giving their second formal statement. He looked haggard, his usual corporate polish entirely absent. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," he said. Detective Morgan stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett, your parents are under our protection. Any conversation will be monitored." "That's fine," Bradley said wearily. I need them to know something." They met in a small conference room, Detective Morgan present but unobtrusive. "Hartley threatened me," Bradley began without preamble. "Not directly. He's too smart for that. But he made it clear that my firm's biggest client, Stanton Industries, would pull their account if I didn't convince you to sell. That's 40% of our revenue. And?" Harold's voice was steady despite his shaking hands. "And I told him to go to hell." Bradley looked up, meeting their eyes for the first time. "I've been a terrible son. I know that. Patricia knows it too. We got so caught up in our own lives, our careers, our success, that we forgot where we came from, who we came from." "Brad," Martha began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I spent last night thinking about what kind of man I've become. The kind who flies across the country to pressure his parents because a rich stranger asked him to. The kind who suggests assisted living like it's a storage solution for inconvenient relatives." His voice broke. "The kind who doesn't even know his parents' anniversary." "You were trying to protect us," Martha said gently. "No, I was trying to manage you. There's a difference." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the check Hartley had given him, tearing it slowly in half. "I've already called Patricia. She's flying in from Seattle. We want to help. Really help, not just throw money at the problem." Harold reached across the table, his trembling hand covering his son's. "We don't need protection, son. We need family." The investigation moved quickly once state authorities got involved. The chamber beneath the mill revealed not just the hot springs, but also Native American artifacts that brought in archaeologists and tribal representatives. The springs themselves tested for remarkable mineral content with genuine therapeutic properties. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Hartley's own daughter, Jennifer, contacted Detective Morgan with a box of documents she'd taken from her father's home safe. "I've watched him destroy people my whole life," she said, sitting in the same conference room where Bradley had reconciled with his parents. "Always justified it as protecting the family legacy, but when I heard he was threatening an elderly couple just trying to renovate their home, I couldn't be part of it anymore." The documents she provided showed decades of systematic intimidation, bribery, and worse. Names, dates, amounts paid to silence witnesses or drive away competitors. Most damning was Richard Hartley's own journal, detailing his knowledge of the murders in the 1,920 seconds and his family's continued cover-up. "He was obsessed with the springs," Jennifer explained. "He had plans for a luxury resort that would have made hundreds of millions. But he needed complete control of the land first." The arrests made national news. Richard Hartley, 3 of his associates, and 2 local officials were charged with conspiracy, racketeering, and attempted murder. The latter for the escalating sabotage at the mill that could have killed Harold and Martha if they'd been inside when a support beam was deliberately weakened. Through it all, Harold and Martha continued their renovation. Patricia had arrived as promised, bringing her husband and teenage children. For the first time in years, the family worked together, clearing debris, rebuilding walls, and slowly transforming the mill. "I can't believe we almost missed this," Patricia said one afternoon, standing beside her mother as they watched Harold teaching his grandson how to use a level despite his trembling hands. "We got so focused on our own lives that we forgot you were still living yours." The town rallied around them as well. Once Hartley's influence was broken, contractors who had been afraid to work with him suddenly became available. The hardware store owner personally delivered supplies, refusing payment for the first load. "You folks showed more courage than anyone in this valley has had in generations," he said. "This is our way of saying thank you." Detective Morgan kept them updated on the investigation. "Hartley's looking at 25 to life if convicted on all charges," she reported. His lawyers are trying to plea bargain, but the prosecutor isn't interested. Too many families have waited too long for justice. 6 months later, the mill stood transformed. The exterior stone had been cleaned and repointed, the water wheel restored to working order. Inside, they had created a unique living space that honored the building's history while making it completely modern and accessible. The grinding stones remained as the centerpiece of the main floor, now polished and surrounded by comfortable seating. The upper floors had been converted into a beautiful home with an elevator installed for Harold's increasing mobility needs. Most importantly, the chamber beneath had been preserved and made accessible, with tribal representatives helping to create interpretive displays about the sacred spring. But the biggest surprise came on their 53rd anniversary. Bradley and Patricia had secretly coordinated with the entire town to throw a celebration at the mill. Over 200 people came, filling the space with laughter and music. "A toast," Bradley announced, raising his glass, "to Harold and Martha Bennett, who taught us that age is just a number, that courage has no expiration date, and that sometimes the best thing you can do with your golden years is to polish them until they shine." Mrs. Chin had outdone herself with the catering. Local musicians provided entertainment, and even Jennifer Hartley attended, having become close friends with Martha during the months of testimony. As the evening wound down, Harold and Martha found themselves alone on the deck they'd built overlooking the water wheel. The sound of rushing water mixed with distant laughter from the remaining guests. "Not bad for a couple of fools who didn't know their place," Harold said. His tremor barely noticeable thanks to new medication the spring seemed to enhance. Martha leaned into him, watching moonlight dance on the water. "I think we knew our place all along. We just had to be brave enough to claim it." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the mill was quiet except for the eternal sound of water, they descended to the chamber. The spring steamed gently, their mineral scent now familiar and comforting. They had installed a small soaking pool, designed with Harold's mobility issues in mind. As they eased into the warm water, feeling the minerals work their subtle magic on aging joints and tired muscles, Martha voiced what they both were thinking. The Hartleys spent a century trying to control this for profit. They committed murder, destroyed families, corrupted an entire town. And for what? For something that was always meant to be shared? Harold finished. The Native Americans understood that. Sacred places aren't meant to be owned. They had already drawn up plans with their lawyers. The mill would become a trust, open to the public, with special programs for seniors and those with chronic health conditions. The springs would be available to all, with a sliding scale ensuring no one was turned away for inability to pay. "Bradley thinks we're crazy to give it away," Harold said. "He's starting to understand that wealth isn't always about money." A soft knock interrupted their solitude. Patricia peered around the door. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who wants to meet you." They wrapped themselves in robes and climbed the stairs to find an elderly Native American man waiting in the main room. He introduced himself as Joseph Crow Feather, a tribal elder. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply. "My grandfather was one of the men who died trying to protect this place in the 1920 seconds. We always knew the truth, but could never prove it. You've given us justice and returned a sacred place to its proper purpose." He presented them with a hand-woven blanket, its pattern telling the story of the healing springs. "For warriors who fight with truth instead of weapons," he said. After he left, they sat wrapped in the blanket, overwhelmed by the day's emotions. Their children were staying the night, sleeping in the guest rooms they'd carefully prepared but never been sure would be used. "You know what the best part is?" Martha said suddenly. "What's that?" "We're not done yet. We're 73 and 71, and we're just getting started." Harold laughed, the sound echoing off the ancient stones. "God help anyone who tries to stop us." The next morning brought a new challenge. A developer from the state capital arrived, having heard about the springs. He offered to partner with them to create a wellness destination that could rival the finest spas in the country. "Think of the revenue potential," he urged, spreading glossy prospectuses across their kitchen table. "With proper marketing, this could become the Sedona of the East." Martha poured him coffee while Harold studied the plans. Their children, still in pajamas, watched from the doorway. "It's impressive," Harold finally said. Very thorough, the developer smiled, sensing success. I knew you'd see the potential. At your age, wouldn't it be nice to have professionals handle everything while you enjoy the profits? At our age, Martha interrupted, we've learned that some things are more important than profits. Thank you for your time, but we're not interested. After the developer left, clearly shocked at being dismissed by elderly people he'd assumed would jump at easy money, Bradley shook his head in admiration. 6 months ago, I would have told you to take that deal. And now? Harold asked. Now I'm proud to be your son. The mill officially opened to the public 3 months later. They had worked with architects to ensure accessibility for all abilities, creating ramps and rails that blended seamlessly with the historic structure. The main floor became a community space, hosting everything from yoga classes to town meeting. The springs operated on a reservation system, with half the slots reserved for free community access and the other half generating enough revenue to maintain the facility. Local teenagers were trained as guides, learning both the history and the sacred nature of the site. Harold's Parkinson's had stabilized remarkably since they began regular soaks in the mineral waters. His neurologist was baffled but couldn't argue with the results. Martha's arthritis had improved to the point where she could work in her garden for hours without pain. It's not a miracle cure, she would tell visitors, but it reminds your body how to heal itself. The first winter in the mill tested them. Heavy snow collapsed part of the restored roof, and ice damaged the water wheel. But the community rallied again, organizing work parties and fundraisers. Even their grandchildren came to help, spending their winter break learning construction skills from their grandfather. This is way better than skiing, Harold's grandson announced, proudly showing off the birdhouse he'd built under supervision. One evening, as they soaked in the springs after a long day of repairs, Harold noticed tears on Martha's cheeks. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she said. I'm just thinking about how we almost settled for that condo in Florida. How we almost believed we were too old to matter. But we didn't, Harold reminded her. We chose to fight. No, Martha corrected. We chose to live. Their story spread beyond the local news. A documentary filmmaker arrived, wanting to capture their inspiring journey of seniors reclaiming their power. They agreed, but only if the focus included the broader story of the springs and the community that had protected their secret. During filming, the filmmaker asked Harold what advice he would give to other seniors feeling marginalized or useless. Harold thought for a long moment, his hand steady as he held Martha's. Don't let anyone else define your worth, he finally said. Not your children, not society, not even your own fears. You've spent decades accumulating wisdom, skills, and experience. Use them. The world needs elder warriors now more than ever. The documentary, titled The Mill Keepers, won several festival awards and brought increased attention to their work. Donations poured in, allowing them to expand programs and even restore the Miller's Cottage as a residence for visiting healers and teachers. Richard Hartley was convicted on all charges, receiving 30 years in prison. His family's assets were partially seized to pay restitution to victims of their crimes over the decades. Jennifer Hartley used her inheritance to establish a fund supporting elder-led community projects. You showed me that standing up to power is possible at any age, she told Harold and Martha at the fund's launch. Their second year at the mill brought unexpected health challenges. Harold's tremor worsened during a particularly stressful period, when state bureaucrats tried to impose regulations that would have limited access to the springs. The fight required multiple trips to the Capitol, testimony before committees, and rallying public support. Maybe we should slow down, Patricia suggested after finding her father exhausted in his workshop. I'll slow down when I'm dead, Harold replied, then softened. I know you're worried, but this fight, it's keeping me alive. Having a purpose is better medicine than anything doctors prescribe. Martha organized the resistance with military precision. She mobilized other seniors, creating a network of Gray Panthers who flooded representatives with calls and letters. When that wasn't enough, she led a bus convoy to the Capitol, where hundreds of elders occupied the health committee meeting until their concerns were heard. The sight of elderly citizens, many with walkers and wheelchairs, refusing to leave until bureaucrats listened, made national news. The regulations were modified to protect access while ensuring safety. "You've become quite the activist, Mrs. Bennett," a reporter observed. "I've always been an activist," Martha corrected. "I just didn't have a cause worth fighting for until now." Their third anniversary at the mill was marked by a letter from the State Historical Society designating the site as a protected landmark. The federal government also stepped in, recognizing the Native American cultural significance and providing grants for preservation. But the most meaningful recognition came from their family. Bradley had restructured his firm to allow more time for pro bono work with elder rights organizations. Patricia had started a program in Seattle, connecting isolated seniors with community projects. "You changed us," Patricia said during the anniversary celebration. "Showed us that aging isn't about declining. It's about distilling down to what really matters." That night, unable to sleep, Harold found Martha in the chamber, sitting beside the springs in quiet meditation. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Just thinking. When we bought this place, everyone said we were crazy. Our own children thought we'd lost our minds. Now look what it's become. A testament to stubborn old fools who refuse to be invisible," Harold suggested. Martha smiled. "I prefer experienced citizens who knew their worth." They sat together in comfortable silence, steam rising around them like incense in a cathedral. The walls that had witnessed murder and conspiracy now held laughter, healing, and hope. A sound from above made them look up. Their grandchildren, visiting for summer break, were sneaking down the stairs with towels and swimsuits. "Busted," the teenager admitted with a grin. "The springs are closed after 10 p.m., Martha said sternly, then winked. "Unless you're family." As the four of them soaked in the warm mineral water, 3 generations connected by shared experience, Harold reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had lost the easy retirement society prescribed for them. Instead, they had found purpose, community, and proof that life's third act could be its most powerful. "Grandpa," his granddaughter asked, "were you really scared when Mr. Hartley threatened you?" "Terrified," Harold admitted. "But your grandmother taught me something important. Being scared doesn't mean you stop fighting. It means you have something worth fighting for." "What were you fighting for?" Harold and Martha exchanged glances. A lifetime of communication in a single look. "The right to matter," Martha said simply. "The right to keep contributing, keep growing, keep living fully until our last breath." "Is that why you didn't take the money and move somewhere easier?" "Easy is overrated," Harold replied. "Challenge keeps you sharp. Purpose keeps you alive. And sometimes," he gestured to the ancient springs, the restored mill above them, the family gathered in the healing water. "Sometimes fighting for something bigger than yourself leads to treasures money can't buy." The summer brought a new challenge when Harold suffered a mild stroke. He recovered quickly, but it served as a stark reminder of mortality. During his hospital stay, Martha never left his side, and their children tag-teamed to ensure someone was always present. "I'm not ready to leave yet," Harold told Martha one night, his speech slightly slurred but determined. "Too much work left to do." "Then we'll do it together," Martha assured him. Same as always. The stroke forced some adaptations. They hired a young couple to help manage the mill's daily operations, though Harold insisted on maintaining his workshop and Martha continued overseeing the heritage programs. Their children worried about them pushing too hard, but the mill's healing waters and sense of purpose seemed to strengthen them. That autumn, they received word that their story had inspired similar projects in 6 other states. Elderly citizens were reclaiming abandoned buildings, creating community spaces, and refusing to be sidelined by age. "We started something," Martha marveled, reading letters from seniors who had found new purpose. "No," Harold corrected. "We remembered something. That elders are meant to be the wisdom keepers, the fighters, the ones who stand up because we have less to lose and more to give." Their 5th year at the mill brought full circle moments. The grandson who had learned construction during winter break returned as a college student, bringing classmates to study sustainable restoration. Patricia's daughter wrote her senior thesis on elder activism, using her grandparents as case studies. Even Bradley, the formerly distant son, had become a regular presence. He'd purchased a small cabin nearby, spending weekends helping with maintenance and learning the woodworking skills his father had tried to teach him decades earlier. "I wasted so much time," he confided to Harold as they worked on restoring an antique grain elevator, chasing success while missing what really mattered. "You're here now," Harold replied, guiding his son's hands on the wood plane despite his own tremor. "That's what counts." The town had transformed as well. The mill's success had sparked a revival, with young families moving in, drawn by the community spirit and access to the healing springs. Property values increased, but Martha and Harold worked with the town council to ensure affordable housing remained available. "Gentrification helps no one if it pushes out the people who built the community," Martha argued at a planning meeting. Their influence extended beyond zoning battles. They established a mentorship program, pairing elders with young people learning traditional crafts. Harold's workshop became a classroom where shaking hands taught steady ones the patience of fine woodwork. One afternoon, a familiar Mercedes pulled up to the mill. Jennifer Hartley emerged, but she wasn't alone. A frail figure in a wheelchair sat in the back seat. Richard Hartley, released on medical parole due to advancing Alzheimer's. "I didn't know where else to bring him," Jennifer said, tears streaming. "He keeps asking to come home, but home to him is the mill from his childhood before," she trailed off. Martha and Harold exchanged glances. The man who had threatened them, who had built an empire on murder and intimidation, now sat confused and diminished, a shell of his former self. "Bring him in," Martha said quietly. They guided the wheelchair to a spot overlooking the water wheel. Richard's eyes cleared momentarily, watching the water flow as it had for over a century. "My grandfather built this," he whispered. "Built it to protect something precious." "Yes," Harold agreed. "And now it protects everyone." Richard began visiting regularly, his moments of lucidity spent sharing stories of the mill's history that no one else knew. It was a strange reconciliation, caring for a former enemy reduced by disease. But Martha and Harold understood that healing sometimes required facing the hardest truths. "Forgiveness isn't about him," Martha explained to those who questioned their compassion. "It's about us choosing not to carry poison in our hearts." Their 7th anniversary at the mill was marked by an unexpected diagnosis. Martha's routine checkup revealed early-stage lung cancer, likely from decades of breathing textile fibers in her youth. The news hit Harold harder than his own stroke. But Martha faced it with the same determination she'd brought to every challenge. "We knew this wasn't forever," she said, holding his trembling hands. "But we've had 7 years we wouldn't have had in that Florida condo. 7 years of purpose, of family, of making a difference." She underwent treatment while refusing to slow down. Between chemotherapy sessions, she continued teaching, weaving classes, and organizing community events. The spring seemed to help with the side effects, and the constant flow of visitors kept her spirits high. "I'm not dying," she would correct well-meaning sympathizers. "I'm living with cancer. There's a difference." Harold threw himself into creating a legacy project, a complete history of the mill, including oral histories from elders who remembered it in operation. He worked with trembling hands to build display cases for artifacts, each piece carefully labeled with its story. Their children rallied around them, but differently than before. Instead of trying to manage their parents' lives, they supported their choices. Patricia took leave from work to help with treatments. Bradley handled legal matters to ensure the mill's trust structure would survive them. "You taught us that aging doesn't mean stopping," Patricia said. "So we won't ask you to stop now." On a cold February morning, Harold woke to find Martha unresponsive beside him. The ambulance came quickly, but they both knew. She regained consciousness briefly in the hospital, long enough to squeeze his hand and whisper, "No regrets." Martha Bennett died at 78, surrounded by family in a room overlooking the valley she'd helped transform. The funeral overwhelmed the small church. Hundreds came to honor the woman who'd shown them that elders could be warriors. Joseph Crowfeather performed a blessing. Jennifer Hartley read a poem about courage. Even Richard, in a rare moment of clarity, spoke about the woman who'd shown mercy to an enemy. Harold struggled in the weeks that followed. The mill felt empty despite the constant flow of visitors. His tremor worsened, and for the first time, he questioned whether he could continue alone. It was Mrs. Chin who pulled him back. "Martha wouldn't want you to quit now," she said firmly. "She'd want you to show everyone that even grief doesn't stop a warrior." So Harold persisted. He finished the history project, dedicating it to Martha. He taught his grandchildren her recipes, passing on her legacy through food and story. Most importantly, he continued their work of proving that age was just a number. New challenges arose. Developers still circled, hoping the elderly widower would be easier to convince. State regulations continued threatening access, but Harold had learned from Martha. The fight itself kept you alive. He established a scholarship in Martha's name for seniors returning to education. He expanded the mill's programs to include grief, support groups, understanding now the particular loneliness of outliving your partner. "She's still here," he would tell visitors, gesturing to the restored walls, the flowing water, the healing springs. "In every stone we cleaned, every life we touched, every person who refuses to be invisible because of age." On his 80th birthday, Harold's family threw a surprise party at the mill. But the real surprise was the announcement that the state legislature had passed the Bennett Act, protecting community-owned healing sites from commercial development. "You did it, Dad," Bradley said, voice thick with emotion. "You and Mom changed how society sees aging." Harold stood carefully, his new walker steady on the stone floor. Around him gathered hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by two elders who refused to accept society's limitations. "Martha and I didn't do anything special," he said, voice carrying despite the tremor. "We just remembered something everyone forgets, that inside every old person is the same fighter who survived everything life threw at them. We're not cute. We're not harmless. We're not done. We're warriors with nothing left to prove and everything left to give." The crowd erupted in applause, but Harold wasn't finished. "So to every elder told they're too old to matter, to every grandparent whose children see them as problems, to every person who thinks their usefulness ends with retirement, look at this mill. Look what two stubborn fools in their 70s accomplished, because they refused to be invisible. Now imagine what you could do." That night, Harold descended alone to the sacred springs. His movements were slow, aided by railings he'd installed for others, but now needed himself. The warm water embraced his aching joints as it had for 7 years. In the steam and silence, he could almost feel Martha's presence. Not a ghost, but the echo of shared purpose that death couldn't erase. "I'll keep fighting," he promised the darkness, "until my last breath, just like we promised." The mill continued to thrive. Harold lived another 3 years, teaching, fighting, and proving daily that age was a gathering of power, not a diminishment. When he finally joined Martha, his funeral matched hers in attendance and impact. The mill stands today as more than a restored building or healing center. It's a testament to the power of elders who refuse society's dismissal, who choose purpose over comfort, who understand that the final chapters can be the most powerful if you're brave enough to write them yourself. Inside, the grinding stones remain, polished by thousands of hands seeking their own transformation. Below, the sacred springs still flow, offering healing to all who come. And in the workshop, Harold's tools wait for the next elder, ready to build something from nothing but determination. The Bennett's grandchildren, now adults, run the mill with the same principles their grandparents established: free access for those in need, respect for the sacred nature of healing, and most importantly, the unwavering belief that every person, regardless of age, has something vital to contribute. They didn't just restore a building, the documentary filmmaker said in a follow-up film 10 years later. They restored faith in the power of elders to change the world. The mill keeps its secrets still, but now they're different secrets. Stories of healing, of courage, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because someone showed them it was possible. The water wheel turns, the springs flow, and somewhere an elder reads this story and thinks, if they could do it. And that's how revolutions begin. Not with the young and fearless, but with the old and fed up, the ones with nothing to lose and wisdom to share. The warrior society tried to retire, but who refused to go quietly. Harold and Martha Bennett bought a derelict mill for $23,000 and transformed it into something priceless. But their greatest renovation wasn't the building. It was the perception of what it means to age in a society that worships youth. They're gone now, but their legacy flows like the springs they protected. In every elder who refuses to be warehoused, in every grandparent who demands to be heard, in every person who reaches retirement and asks, "What's next?" instead of, "Is it over?" The mill stands as proof that paradise isn't about perfection, it's about purpose. And purpose has no expiration date. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If Harold and Martha's story inspired you to see aging differently, if it reminded you that every chapter of life has its own unique power, then please subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not too old to matter, not too old to fight, not too old to transform their world. And remember, inside every elder is a warrior waiting for one more battle worth fighting.